Hi, and welcome to An Evil Mind. Today we're going to be talking about Erle Stanley Gardner, best known as the author of the Perry Mason books. And this, of course, is Raymond Burr, who played Perry Mason on TV for, I don't know, 7 or 8 seasons, easily, something like that. Gardner is born July 17th, 1889, and dies March 11th, 1970. He was born in Massachusetts, moved to California later in life, passed the California bar in 1911. His main practice is in criminal defense, like Mason, and tended to defend impoverished people, minorities, people who were real likely to get a fair shake in the California court system of the 1920s and 30s. And indeed, in the 1940s, Gardner would found what was called the Court of Last Resort, which is an organization of himself and other lawyers formed to help defend people who either lacked resources or who had been wrongfully convicted. However, Gardner did quit formal regular law practice after the first Mason novel came out in 1933 and was a big enough success. He had been writing pulp stories up to that point. He had his first pulp story published in 1921. And, between 1921 and 1965, he wrote approximately 200 short stories. Now, mind you, pre Mason, these are all in the pulps, even post Mason, but pre. So numbers are hard to nail down with absolute certainty. Although the record is that he wrote 37 short stories in 1926 alone. Some of these were proto Mason characters, such as a lawyer called Ken Corning. But he also wrote stories about Lester Leith, who was a professional burglar. Now, Mason was based, of course, in large part on Gardner himself, but also based on another real person, Earl Rogers, who was a defense attorney who had won 74 of 77 of the murder trials that he was involved in, and once defended Clarence Darrow, in Hair at the Wind, that guy, on a charge of bribing a jury. Now, Warner Brothers jumped on the books early and did 4 Perry Mason movies in the 1930s. One with Donald Woods, one with Ricardo Cortez, who was the first person to play Sam Spade on screen in the 1931 adaptation of The Maltese Falcon. The other 2 Mason movies featured Warren Williams, who was the second guy to play the second guy to play Sam Spade in Satan Met a Lady with Betty Davis, which I believe is 35. So, Warren plays Mason as kind of like this jolly, hard drinking, gourmet playboy around town. Which, when you figure some of the other things that Williams did, that was kind of his stock character. They did a lot. He also played Philo Vance, I think, in several movies. Um, so when no matter how many Mason books he wrote, and I believe he is credited with 82 Mason novels, at least per Wikipedia, and 4 Mason short stories, Gardner wrote other things too. Over the years, so we count the pulps, but even once he starts writing Perry Mason, his pseudonyms include Carl Franklin Ruth, Carlton Kendrick, Charles M. Green, Charles J. Kenny, Edward Leeming, Grant Holliday, Kyle Corning, Les Tilray, Robert Parr, and Stephen Caldwell, and most notably, A. Fair, which is the pseudonym that he wrote the Cool and Lamb private detective novels, and we'll circle back to those. So in the books, Mason is a little different than is in the TV series, certainly different than he is in his movie versions. Mason he's a defense lawyer and he's out there, he's solving mysteries, but he's definitely of the hard-boiled era. Mason doesn't ever kill anybody, but he is a two-fisted defense lawyer. And even though Paul Drake is with him from the beginning, and Paul Drake being the Mason's preferred private investigator, Mason also largely functions, at least in the early novels, as his own private investigator as well. He's going out and he's checking out things. He's, gathering evidence. He's talking to witnesses. He's sending Drake on assignments, but he's doing a lot of his own legwork too. and then bringing it all back to his faithful secretary, Della Street. Um, Now, that's not quite what he was on TV. On TV was very reserved, very serious, um, and he wasn't out there getting in fistfights. He wasn't out there having car chases. He wasn't out there occasionally monkeying with evidence, as him and Drake did on at least one occasion in the early novels. I've only read like the first, I believe, 7 of these. But I have read about that same number of Cool and Lamb novels, and I want to call attention to those because a lot of people don't know that those were Gardner books. Now he wrote 30 of those, and we'll round up his numbers here at the end. But it's Bertha Cool, who owns a detective agency, and her lead investigator, Donald Lamb, who is also an attorney. When he comes to her, and later on, of course, during World War II, he joins the Navy. And they are, of course, your classic study and contrast. Bertha Cool is a middle-aged woman, quite, shall we say, stout of frame, and Donald Lamb is like a small guy. He's maybe like 5'6", running somewhere in like the 125, 130 pound range, which is not great for him. He eventually does learn some martial arts to defend himself because he gets thumped on all the time. He's out there getting his head knocked in. Bertha is in the field sometimes, but not much. And this is why I personally believe, I don't know that I've seen anybody else advance this notion. Maybe it's original to me. I feel like it can't be. But I view them as like Gardner's take on Rex Stout's Nero Wolfe and Archie Goodwin. The Nero Wolfe's shtick was that he almost never left his house. And, Archie Goodwin have to go out, do the legwork, bring the evidence back to him, and Nero would skull it around and come up with a solution to the mystery, which to a limited extent is kind of how Cool and Lamb also function, although Bertha Cool is, of course, nowhere near the thinking machine that Nero Wolfe is. But as I said, I believe these could be a parody version. Gardner and Wolfe are working at the same time in the pulps and also in novel publishing, because I think the first Nero Wolfe book, Fertile Lance, I believe that comes out either 32 or 33. I've refer to my earlier episode on Rex Stout. I'm sure I had it nailed down there. It's not in here anymore. So, in addition to 82 Mason novels and 30 Cool and Lambs, Gardner also wrote 9 books about crusading prosecuting attorney Doug Selby, 2 about Terry Klain, who I believe was another PI, 2 about Gramps Wiggins, who was like an amateur, elderly, crime solver. And he's just, Grandpa would go out and solve them. I've never read any of those. I never read any of the Klains or Selbys either. 5 miscellaneous non-series novels, and 13 nonfiction travel books, and 2 nonfiction books about crime and law. At the time of his death in 1970, Erle Stanley Gardner was the best-selling American author of the 20th century to that point, surpassing even Mickey Spillane. And Mickey Spillane sold a truckload of books. There were years Mickey Spillane outsold the Bible. So you've got plenty to work with here. Because Gardner wrote Mason novels more or less up until his death. The way Stout wrote Nero Wolfe novels until his death in 1975. These guys, they had that classic pulp drive. They could just bang them out. And it's a thing, I don't have that gift. I kind of wish I did, but of course also that market no longer exists either. So I don't have any particular favorites in either the Mason or Cool and Lamb series to point you at. You may as well just start at the beginning with both of them, and you've got plenty. If you like them, keep on going. There will be some links below, of course. We invite you to check those out. Of course, that helps the channel. But if not, go to the library. Your local library probably has some of these. I mean, if nothing else, your used bookstores are going to have them too. Neither one is particularly affordable in Kindle edition. That's all I can say is sometimes the prices for these are higher. It's starting about like $5, and you go, well, okay. It's like a lot of these authors. This guy's been dead for a long time. He's not in the public domain, but maybe we could have more reasonable prices. But Kindle gonna Kindle. So anyway, thanks again for watching this. We'll see you next time, and please enjoy the books. All right, bye.
Like, subscribe, repost, share everywhere. To see what else we're up to, visit xynobooks.com, xenobooks.com.